Hi.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can definitely hear you. Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
Do you have any specific needs for room facilitation, just hanging out, making sure people are muted?
Yep, that's about it. If we have time, I'm hoping we do for maybe some small breakout rooms to talk about some of
Yeah,
this stuff, but that's just once and can be randomly done. So nothing huge there.
easy peasy. I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
The keynote was awesome this morning. I love him
He
so
was very
much.
good. Yeah, he was very good.
Stacy, how long should we wait or just get going anytime? What do you think?
I think you are probably good to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you coming back in the afternoon after lunch. I'd like to thank Jen Macken from Red Rocks Community College for putting on this presentation this afternoon. And if you could remember to follow those naming conventions so that we can track your attendance, that would be super great. And I'll hand it over to Jen. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Let's see if I can share here. All right, has everybody seen that okay? Awesome. Well, welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Jen Macken, and I am the Dean of Enrollment Management and Student Affairs at Red Rocks Community College. Prior to this role, I was briefly an interim dean in academic affairs, but before that, I spent about 8 years as our director of inclusion and diversity. So this area is a passion of mine, always has been, and I assume always will be. What I'll be talking with you about today is a study I've been doing as part of my doctoral research work on culturally engaging campus environments and sense of belonging at Red Rocks Community College. So first, thinking about the research problem that was in front of us, higher education has often been considered to be the most direct path to upward mobility in the US, and often our nation's greatest hope for achieving our ideals of equality for all. Historically, however, our US higher education system has not been open or accessible to our nation's marginalized populations. The creation of community and technical colleges expanded opportunities, as well as financial assistance programs for diversity of students in higher ed, but not in proportion to the general population. Also, while the number of students enrolled in higher education has increased, enrollments for students of color have increased, but not proportionally, as I said. Also, equity gaps still persist. For the 2013 entering cohort of students at four-year institutions, Asian students had the highest completion rate at 73.8%. White students were next at 63.7%, followed by Hispanic or Latino or Latinx students at 52.9%, and then Black or African American students at 40%, and American Indian students at 35.3%. At two-year institutions, as we all know, our rates are even lower than at four-year counterparts, and our equity gaps persist. With an equity gap of 31.2% for Black students, 33.8% for Latinx students, and 38.3% for white students in the 2016 cohort. When we think about our own institutions, Red Rocks, I'm sad to say, still has equity gaps, as I'm guessing many of your other schools do as well. To give you a sense of what we're looking at here, when we look at our fall-to-fall retention rate for full and part-time students, overall it's 44.2%, which is pretty in line with the national average. However, when we start disaggregating that, we find that students of color have an overall fall-to-fall retention rate of 38.2%, with Black students at 26.7%, Latinx students at 41%, and American Indian students at 35.7%. Our climate surveys at the college, we've had a few of those in the last decade, I think 3 overall. And they've also shown gaps in sense of belonging for various minoritized groups. So in order to support students of color at the college, we're hoping to better understand our institution's role in creating supportive environments for students of color. A multitude of factors influence a student's choice and ability to persist, including background factors and external influences, as well as their experiences within the institution. Sense of belonging is one such factor that's related to student success. It contributes to persistence and degree completion. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words today. Given the underrepresentation of students of color in predominantly white institutions, sense of belonging may hold even more influence over students of color. And as such, it's a critical importance that institutions such as ours attempt to understand how sense of belonging can be cultivated. As Strayhorn notes, sense of belonging is important, and it takes on heightened importance in contexts where individuals are inclined to feel isolated, alienated, lonely, or invisible. So the purpose of the study here today, pretty simply, is to understand how the campus environment at our college influences sense of belonging for students, while paying particular attention to differences between white students and students of color. We're gonna go over the literature a little bit. I won't belabor this too much, as I'm sure lots of you have read lots of the things I'm gonna talk about. But just to make sure we're all on the same page with what's out there already, before we started this study, I wanted to kind of give a brief overview. So sense of belonging has been consistently identified by researchers as a key factor contributing to student success. particularly for students with identities which have been marginalized and underserved historically. Lack of belonging can also lead to diminished performance on tests, reduced motivation, and a strong sense of belonging contributes to increased engagement, motivation, persistence, retention, and completion. So most people are familiar with Tinto's theory of student departure or dropout. It's prevailed for a long time over the past 4 decades as the most widespread and cited theory about this, right? In his theoretical model, he argues that the process of dropout from college can be viewed as a longitudinal process of interactions between the individual and the academic and social systems of the college, during which that person's experience in those systems continually modify their goal of institutional commitment in ways which lead to persistence and or to varying forms of dropout. Now, key to Tinto's theory are the ideas of academic integration and social integration, the latter which occurs primarily through informal peer group associations, semi-formal extracurricular activities, and interaction with faculty. Researchers have also pointed to the limitations of Tinto's theory. It doesn't accurately reflect the needs and experiences of students from diverse backgrounds, particularly students of color. So then we can look to researchers such as Hurtado and Carter. So they were the first ones to propose the need for a new theoretical and empirical construct, sense of belonging, in order to better understand how particular forms of social and academic experiences affect students of color. The creation of this construct was in direct response to Tinto, saying that this doesn't accurately capture what we're looking at with different student groups. So in order to develop the sense of belonging idea, they used different data sources, including 2 different disseminations of the Survey of Hispanic Students and the Student Descriptive Questionnaire, as well as institutional data. And the results indicated a strong relationship between sense of belonging and conversations about course content, about sense of belonging and conversations about course content outside the classroom. And in regards to student clubs, they found that only certain clubs actually mattered for sense of belonging. Those were the religious clubs and Greek organizations, right? So they found that there's a lot of nuance within the Latino community that wasn't directly replicating what we saw with white students previously. And over time, sense of belonging has been studied from a lot of different perspectives. In the studies, you'll see factors related to sense of belonging, as well as a variety of institutional characteristics, different types of learning opportunities, and that relationships become one of the big variables overall. So beginning with faculty relationships, right? Research consistently shows, and Dr. Wood talked this morning again about how we have to have a relationship with students before we can actually teach. Studies have shown to have a positive relationship between students' sense of belonging and faculty interaction, especially when the faculty take an interest in the student's development. Peer interactions are also a big deal around sense of belonging. So they can have an impact either positively or negatively, depending on the situation. So social interactions with students from different racial or ethnic backgrounds can increase sense of belonging generally. They can especially do so for students of color. And when students interact with peers, conversations about social and cultural issues have been positively linked to sense of belonging, as have peer discussions in the classroom. However, whether these conversations are happening for all students remains to be seen, and we'll dig into that a little more in a minute. Lastly, co-curricular engagement. Nothing rocket science or revelatory here, but it can impact belonging. However, the effects are not consistent across all activities, right? For example, going back to Hurtado and Carter up there, they found that the second year of college, only participation in religious organizations and Greek life, again, had that significant impact. It shifted in the third year, though, where participation in social and community organizations was most significant. So you can see context matters quite a bit here. And we have to dig into the context of an individual institution to really understand what's happening. Also of note, sense of belonging is different for white students and students of color, right? Students of color and white students do not experience college environments in the same way. They have very different perspectives on what bias looks like and how it presents in a college environment. And they report more instances of discrimination and bias and lower levels of belonging than their white counterparts. However, that effect is kind of buffered by more diverse peer interactions and more positive perception of the institution's commitment to diversity, right? So if students of color see a commitment by their institution, it will increase that positive perception. When we get into individual student groups, it's a little more complex, as everybody might imagine. So research on Latinx students shows that maintaining positive relationships, a positive campus climate, faculty interest, community service, and positive cross-racial interactions are positive contributors to sense of belonging. For our Black or African American students, that shifts to faculty interactions, peer interactions, and specifically campus climate. We see this as a very strong indicator for that group. For our Native American students, there's two kind of big studies on belonging for that group. And they both show that disconnection from cultural heritage inhibits belonging, right? And this one's really fascinating if you think back to Tinto, because it was all about, with his theory, you had to kind of disidentify with your home community to re-identify with your college community. And we find for Native American and Indigenous students in particular, that's probably the worst thing we could do for them, right? Because it's the connection to their home culture that matters the most. And studies on Asian and Pacific Islander students show that factors such as living in the residence halls, mentorship from instructors and faculty, peer mentorship, campus involvement, and civic engagement all have a part to play in their sense of belonging. Of particular note, intersectionality is a theme throughout all of these studies, especially for students of color in college environments, as students inhabit multiple identities simultaneously, right? And results for multiracial students, we should note, do not always mirror those of other student of color groups. There's a great study by Johnson in 2007, showed that multiracial or multi-ethnic students had the highest sense of belonging of all groups, even surpassing white students, right? So again, I think there's a lot going on here, and the research shows it based on identity, how we're perceived by those within our institution, and the treatment we receive because of that perception. Now, another piece of this is that research has consistently shown that not only is the environment in which learning occurs a significant contributing factor to sense of belonging, but also that this effect is more salient for students of color than their white counterparts, particularly at primarily white institutions or PWIs. This also holds true for undocumented Black, Latinx, Asian American, and Native American students. One explanation for this intensified relationship is the minority student stress kind of framework. And that's defined as past experiences based on academic or social microaggressions, feeling invisible, stereotyped with the model minority myth, or feeling a need to prove oneself as worthy for college admission. You'll see a lot standing out from the presentation this morning, right? Microaggressions, how we are viewed by others. And this minority student stress seems to amplify the effects of a hostile climate on sense of belonging for students. Students of color also experience more bias, discrimination, and harassment than their white peers. And so even without past experiences contributing to the impact of minority student stress, students of color still experience more negative campus racial climate day in and day out, right? And that's just the reality. Within group peer interactions can vary and often contribute to sense of belonging for students of color. So sometimes students of color will find support in cultural clubs, right? Cultural support centers on campuses can serve a vital role for students. However, they don't always work that way either. So there are examples out there where we find students of color, for example, in a Latino student club, were more aware of microaggressions and had a lower perception of campus climate because their ability to speak to each other about their experiences, kind of like consciousness raising for 70s feminists, right? Helped them understand the negativity that was happening wasn't just for them, but for their peers as well. And that overall shifted their perception of the climate around them. Let's see, perceived campus support is also a significant factor for sense of belonging. Sometimes there is support available. I'm sure we've all experienced this, but students may not understand that it's there or feel that it's for them, right? So making sure the students know the supports that are there, how we can do that and get it to them is the most important thing. So the model I'm going to talk through today is the culturally engaging campus environments framework. This was developed by Museus and Smith back in 2014. And you can see here, there's a lot going on, right? So this framework kind of takes into account external influences such as family, finances, employment, and pre-college inputs such as demographics, academic dispositions, and preparation. These factors all contribute to what happens within the college environment. There's also these individual influences of sense of belonging, academic dispositions, and academic performance. These are kind of things that happen during the college experience. Now, moving through this, there's college success outcomes over here on the right, such as learning, development, satisfaction, persistence, and degree completion. And you'll see up at the top are these culturally engaging campus environment variables. We're going to talk about them more in depth, but the idea here is that these things that exist in our college environments and on our campuses are actually impacting the individuals through their experience on campus and ultimately influencing student success because of it. Now, the first 5 indicators are about cultural relevance. So they focus on the extent to which campus environments engage and reflect the cultural backgrounds, communities, and identities of diverse college students. First, we have cultural familiarity, which is campus spaces for undergraduates to connect with faculty, staff, and peers who understand their cultural backgrounds and experiences. Next is culturally relevant knowledge, which is opportunities for students to learn and exchange knowledge about their own cultural communities via culturally relevant curricular and co-curricular activities. Next is cultural community service. Those are opportunities for students to give back and positively transform their cultural communities. Meaningful cross-cultural engagement are programs and practices that facilitate educationally meaningful cross-cultural interactions among their students that focus on solving real-life social and political problems. And then finally, cultural validation. Campus cultures that validate the cultural backgrounds, knowledge, and identities of diverse students. The next 4 factors fall under cultural responsiveness. First, we have humanized educational environments. Those are environments in which students are able to develop meaningful relationships with faculty and staff who care about and are committed to their success. Proactive philosophies are philosophies that lead faculty, administrators, and staff to proactively make students aware of important information, opportunities, support services, rather than waiting for students to seek them out. Holistic support defines whether college students have access to at least one faculty or staff member who they trust and are confident will provide them the information they need, offer the help they seek, or connect them with the information or support they require, regardless of the issue they face. And I also missed the first one up there, collectivist cultural orientations. And those are campus cultures that emphasize a collectivist cultural orientation characterized by teamwork and pursuit of mutual success rather than individual success and competition. And we're going to talk about the study itself very briefly before we get into the results and what they said. So the research questions we were working from. What is the relationship between culturally engaging campus environments and sense of belonging among white students and students of color? And to get to this, we wanted to find out what's the relationship between those environments and sense of belonging among white students, among students of color, and what are the differences between the two groups? We added a secondary research question at the bottom there on how do students' experiences of the campus environment affect their sense of belonging at RRCC? That necessitated a mixed methods approach. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this, but if not, mixed methods is using both qual and quant together, right? So it gives us the ability to center the voices of students of color, kind of bringing in their verbiage, the ways they see the campus in their own words. It'll help to give context to the quantitative results. Statistics can tell us a lot, but they can't always give us the full picture of what's happening. And this allows us to gain valuable stakeholder insight to develop a more complete picture of the subject of study, right? I also intentionally chose to use a critical race mixed methods approach defined by DeCure, Gumby, and Schultz that has 3 more criteria about how we inform our study and work within a critical race framework to make sure the voices of people of color are heard and represented. The survey itself, the Culturally Engaging Campus Environment Survey, takes about 10 to 15 minutes for students to complete. We found it was a lot quicker with ours. We did a shortened version, so it was only about 8 minutes for students to complete. We did a single stage sample of all current degree or certificate seeking adult students enrolled past the fall census date in fall 2020. So that number, we had exactly 4,670 students. We got about a 19% response rate from the survey. And then once we cleaned out the data set for those who hadn't completed at least 80% of the substantive questions, as well as those who were missing key demographic info, we're left with a data set that included 582 student responses, about 12% of the people we had sent it out to. For the focus group part of our study here, and that's the qualitative piece we chose to use, we did 2 focus groups, one for white students and one for students of color. All students who completed the survey had the opportunity to express their interest at the end if they wanted to participate in the focus groups. And we signed up 10 students for each group, knowing that life happens and gets in the way and not everybody would probably be able to attend. So we ended up with 6 students of color in that group and 8 students in the white student group. And then after the focus groups were complete, we used deduce to code and find themes within the data after establishing intercoder reliability for the codes that were used. So this exciting part, what did we find? Before considering students of color as a legitimate subsample, because you'll see we're using them lumped together here, and I know a lot of you are saying, no, 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 let's not do that, and I agree with you. I'm gonna tell you why we had to. We have small numbers of a lot of our subsample student of color groups here, right? Very low percentage of Black students and Native American Indigenous students. And those are two of the groups we really work on targeting at the college because they have lower completion persistence rates and show bigger equity gaps in our data. However, in order to keep them in the study, we couldn't actually separate out every group. So we had to lump folks together to make sure we could at least look at students of color. And then we hoped that the focus groups would help illuminate more of what was going on with those specific groups. So let's see, we performed an ANOVA to compare between and within group differences for students of color of different racial identities. And it showed there was a statistically significant difference in the mean for cultural familiarity between at least two groups, none for the others. And then when we dug in with a Cheffe post hoc criterion, we found that there wasn't really a significance there. It was based on the small sample sizes. So again, the small numbers of some respondent groups were throwing the data off. However, students of color could still be considered collectively as a group for statistical purposes. It's interesting when you look at the results here, we have the means and standard deviations. I know it's small, but I'll talk through it just a bit. White students generally had higher scores for the cultural relevance indicators, and almost the reverse was true for the cultural responsiveness indicators, where students of color scored higher than white students for all but one variable, which I found very interesting. Students of color had higher scores for collectivist cultural orientations than white students. And the same was true for students of color in regards to humanized educational environments and proactive philosophies. However, white students scored higher on holistic support, and the sense of belonging variable showed a small difference between groups, but students of color scored higher than white students, which goes against pretty much all the research out there saying that PWIs, white students will have a higher sense of belonging, right? It's not a huge difference, but it's something of note that was interesting. Next, Pearson correlation coefficient was computed to assess the linear relationship between the sense of belonging and the 9cc indicators for each subsample. Our results showed that for students of color, all 9cc indicators were positively associated with sense of belonging at the 0.001 level. The same was true for white students, right? And we all know correlation is not causation, but there's a very high correlation going on here. So there's something to it. Then to see the causation piece, we went for regression analysis. What we found here, the student of color model, R squared was 0.62 and the adjusted R squared was 0.61, meaning that 61 to 62% in the variation and sense of belonging for these students could be explained by the model we were using. The white student model explained an even higher amount, 66 to 67% of the variation. So it's really interesting to note there, because sometimes when we're talking about equity in the classroom, right, some of that pushback is, when you talked about raising all boats with the tide this morning again, people are often concerned if we focus on one group, say students of color, we're not attending to white students. But the great thing about the CC model is that it actually works for all student groups, right? These indicators show importance for white students and students of color. So for the student of color subsample, 3 of the 9 indicators exhibited positive and statistically significant relationships with sense of belonging. And those were collectivist cultural orientations. They had the strongest one, followed by holistic support and cultural familiarity. Then for the white student sample, 4 of the CC indicators were found to exhibit positive and significant relationships. So those were holistic support, humanized educational environments, proactive philosophies, and cross-cultural engagement. Next, for the qualitative results, like I said, we used deduce to code and kind of search for themes within there. And we came up with 3 themes. First, classroom experiences. Second was navigating services. And the third was support networks. So within the classroom, some things to note, we had 3 sub-themes around peers, faculty, and culturally relevant content. I'm just going to kind of summarize what we found there, because I do want to get to some conversation time too. So as far as peers go, students of color were far more interested in peer connections. They seemed to focus on peers when talking about the classroom environment, and this may partly be because they had more negative experiences with faculty. When we looked at comments around faculty and separated them into positive, neutral, and negative kind of tones and words being used, students of color had lots of negative experiences, white students had almost none, right? However, I want to make sure the students also noted they didn't feel it was based on race. They felt that it wasn't their race per se, right? That there were other things going on, that the student or the faculty or an instructor just wasn't understanding their life circumstances. Let's see, white students had mostly positive experiences with faculty. They talked very highly of them, and even talking about choosing courses based on faculty members, right? I wanted to come to Red Rocks because I knew this person was teaching this thing that was so fascinating to me. Or I've had this professor before and wanted to take their course again because they made me feel welcome. And then in the classroom, when it comes to culturally relevant content, we learned that it has to be implemented with intention and be strongly connected to course materials. So if you can't just add in something, because particularly white students or those who may not be from an underrepresented group will ask, why are we talking about this? But when it's brought in a way that they can see the connection to what they're learning and how it could be applied in the real world, they were thankful for that kind of education. And students of color talked about the same kinds of ideas. When it's integrated well and it's seen as valued by the rest of the class, it's a positive experience for them. But there were also instances where students of color talked about being in classes where their cultures were discussed and feeling that it was kind of one big microaggression, right? The faculty weren't being responsive or really representing the culture the way they felt they should. So any kind of introduction should be done with care and concern. When it comes to navigating services, students tended to have to run around to find the right answer. I'm sure this is only our institution and no other on campus or on earth, but you know, they seem to go to one department, then to the next, and not always getting what they needed. Students of color had more negative experiences than their white counterparts, and they expressed frustration that they couldn't find people that understood their experiences. And I think this comes back to the idea of people who like them, right? Who look like them, who they feel connected to, who they feel they can have a comfortable conversation that's more honest, right? Because they might understand more about where they're coming from. Another thing that came out of those conversations was around communication. So students expressed a lot of thanks for getting proactive information, especially from faculty members. They also talked about having lots of information in their email. And then there was the conversation about too much email, right? I think we've all seen this too since COVID. When we're communicating electronically as the primary way to go, it gets overwhelming for everyone, right? And then people stop checking messages. And also this was a result of work-life balance too. Students would talk about, you know, I already have a personal email and a work email, and I'm not going to check a third email for school, right? And we could talk about forwarding emails and all those things, but it's just good to note that email may not be the best, so we need to use multiple channels of communication to reach those students that may not be checking at all. When it comes to support networks, for students of color, campus offices seemed like the stronger place of support. They would talk about places like International Student Services, the LGBTQ+ Center, the Center for Multicultural Excellence, TRIO, kind of those places that are built to support these students, right? So that was good to note they're taking advantage of them, and they do feel like spaces where they can connect with peers and perhaps staff and faculty as well. Programming came up over and over and over. Students want more programming and they want it in multiple modalities, right? So they want to have opportunities to connect with peers. They want opportunities where they can meet with staff and faculty as well to get information that they need. And they want them to be virtual options and in-person options. The students that are on campus want to be here in person. They're excited about it. They're stoked to be back post-COVID. And the students that are remote, it's not so much they don't want to be here, but it's a challenge, right? So some of them live by the airport, some live in California. Just getting to campus was not going to be a reality for these students. And they wish there were more opportunities to kind of just log in and watch a theater production or be present for a speaker. And they knew about some opportunities, but not others that existed currently on campus. So again, communication kind of fell in here as well. Lastly, representation came up. Particularly for students of color, talking about representation, there was definitely a dichotomy there where they talked about connecting with peers, and with peer interactions, race and identity, ethnicity wasn't as important, right? They wanted to connect with peers around struggles, what's it like to be a college student, being an older adult college student, working parents coming to college, right? Those are the ways they wanted to meet peers around those things that they're experiencing together. But when it came to faculty and staff, they wanted to see more racial and ethnic diversity, right? They could see with peers that it was more about the experience they were sharing, but with faculty and staff, it was about feeling represented at the college and walking down the hallways and noting who's here and who's not, and who looks like me and who doesn't. And students of color had a hard time finding people that looked like them on campus, and that kind of decreased their belonging, right? Because they're walking the halls feeling like, not so much I don't belong here. They felt that they belonged here to go to college, but that they there weren't people like them to support them. And that could be a factor down the road. Next, I'm going to walk through the mixed methods results where we take the survey data and the focus group data and kind of put it together. And I'm going to highlight some quotes from students here to show kind of the general tone of what we were discussing. So for students of color, cultural familiarity was a significant factor on the survey. When it comes to classroom experiences, one student said, if there was more representation in the faculty, I think that would be great. There's definitely a lack of just overall human representation, right? When it comes to navigating services, a student said, when I finally went to the department I was supposed to talk to about the issues I was having, it just went around and around in circles. And because the person that I was speaking with was also nowhere near my demographic, they could only politely listen to me. They couldn't understand or relate to what I was talking about. And then with the support networks, a student said, we are immigrants and we do support each other with advice, but homework and with other material and non-material things like, giving rides home. And there's a strong solidarity among the immigrants. So you can see, right, finding cultural familiarity in those support networks was a positive thing, whereas navigating services and classroom experiences were not as positive for these students. Another significant one for students of color was collectivist cultural orientations. So when we align this with the focus groups we find in classroom experiences, one student said, I met a Black girl from Mexico in one of my classes and we just partnered up for study group through the discussions. We were always, responding to each other. Maybe just our response rates were similar. We kind of would always respond to each other. And then we did a study group. Right? And this student talked throughout the focus group about her wanting to have study groups with people and to have study buddies, right? This term she kept bringing up because she didn't want to study alone. For her, her academic journey was about being with others. It wasn't about individual success, but making sure they were all learning together. For navigating services, one of our international students said that that department could answer some questions about, things to help you navigate your way if you're an international student, but also just to hang out, talk and stuff, to just socialize and meet people. So that's one thing. Right? They were using services not only for the services intended, but a place to find their peers. Again, this collectivist idea of I need to find my people to have that support network. And then specifically with support networks, students said, not so much just being a way for people to connect through their nationality or the race or something, but more opportunities for people to connect based on interests or needs. And again, this is back to that idea that for students of color, it isn't really so much the peers that they feel need other students of color. They need peers who understand what they're going through. And that may not be the most salient thing at the time. It's probably more work-life balance, specific disciplines, right? We find a lot of belonging with STEM students sometimes because they work so closely together and have so many courses. So thinking through how we build networks and how we allow students to build our networks will become really critical. For white students, the first significant factor was meaningful cross-cultural engagement. So a few ways this showed up. First of all, in classroom experiences, a white student said, then I think it's good to have multiple groups because some people are just here for humanities, And so they're not necessarily going to want all the same STEM classes that like I want and like other STEM majors are going to want. And I just think diversity is a good foundation. Right, so this was a white student who appreciated that there was incorporation of DEI principles into their classes. Even though they were in STEM, they could see that it was going to be helpful beyond the classroom when they got out into the work world. As far as support networks, where we can have cross-cultural engagement, the SRC, our Student Recreation Center, came up quite a few times. One student said, I think the SRC is probably the biggest focal point at Red Rocks in terms of trying to create a community feeling, and people go in there always seem to be really happy. And I don't know, working out just brings people together, right? We've also seen this with usage data. Our students of color use the Student Recreation Center proportionally higher than our white students. It could be cultural familiarity. It could be that this is an activity from their communities that they want to participate in. It would take some more digging to know exactly what's going on, but there's definitely a familiarity in the rec center for not only white students, but students of color. I just wanted to add that in. White students also had positive, significant relationships between sense of belonging and humanized educational environments. So what this looks like for them in the classroom, one student said of their faculty member, he's like so interested in like hearing everyone out and everyone's opinion, and you just feel seen, right? I think we all wish we could have every student in our classes say that. Feeling seen is huge, right? Valued and important in their learning experience. And then support networks. Students said, last semester, I ended up failing one of my classes. My grandpa had passed away, and my advisor was so great. Got me back on track. Let's make a plan so we can keep you in school. right? So again, white students finding lots of support from campus offices and using their advisors as a tool to help them get back on track. White students were also connected between proactive philosophies and sense of belonging. So as far as the classroom goes there, one student said, if you have like that sense of community in your specific class, I feel like they're probably more likely to reach out with that information as well. So they were describing a classroom in which this, again, faculty member was very engaged. This was the same student that felt they'd been seen by that faculty member. But this student also felt that because the faculty member had taken the time to build community in the classroom, they were the kind of faculty member that would also send important information. And while we may not know these things are connected empirically, in students' minds they are, right? Because this faculty member cares, so I should pay attention to what they send me because they're going to send me important things. As far as navigating services, a student said, I think one of the things I really liked about the kind of help that the school gave us with in regards to finances or anything like that was the awareness they brought to it. They made it very easy to know that, hey, this is something you can take advantage of. And this was in regards to the COVID money that came through for students, all of those different grants from the federal government. The students were so thankful that their faculty were the ones telling them about it, right? They were saying, my faculty member said, there's money for you, just contact this person. They did, they got the info easily in their email. And they felt that this was an example where there wasn't bureaucracy, right? There weren't a ton of stumbling blocks to get over to get this funding. It was just made very easy. And they wished that more processes at the college could be so simple. And lastly, both student groups had holistic support as a positive and significant relationship to sense of belonging. So one example from the classroom, I think if the teacher has the passion, then they see you trying, they'll help you. Every circumstance, every class that I've gone through so far in Red Rocks, that's been any teacher that I've had, right? A very, very positive look of what's happening in the classroom. And then with support networks, one of the comments was, they're like my first go-to when I need to, when I have some questions, or if I have a problem I don't really know how to fix from over here. But yeah, they've always been super helpful, or, directed me to a more helpful person if they can't, help with my problems. Lots of interesting language choices, but the point here being financial aid, right? We always hear horror stories of financial aid being a hard office, not at our campus. Shannon Weber's amazing. But financial aid, generally speaking, can be a challenge, right? And these students were like, no, that's my first call, because these are the people that know where to get me and they never drop me and they will make sure the handoff is warm and blah, 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 right? So really understanding that the network is the important part, not just the support services exist, but how they're connected together and how we help students navigate them. Because if we're not doing those simple things like the warm handoff or making sure they're connected to a person that's going to give them what they need, then they get dropped and feel like they don't belong here. So now I want to take a little bit of time with implications for practice based on all that. I know I've been blah, 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 blah. So you're all gonna get to talk to yourselves. I'm gonna ask Stacy to break everybody into small groups just for, let's see, maybe till 50 after 13 minutes, give some time.
Sure, yeah, we have 45 participants. About what size would you like those breakout groups to be?
Let's go 7 or 8 people. What would that be?
6 rooms?
Sure,
7
perfect.
rooms?
Perfect.
All right, those rooms are open, so you can click the button to move yourself over. Jen, about let's see, how much time do we have?
So I was thinking until maybe, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, so we'll pull them back at 1:35.
Perfect, thank you.
Do you happen to know, is Monday siblings of Freddie? Because they look the same.
They're twins, twin brothers, Stacy.
Look the same.
It's amazing.
Like, how did I end up with 2 Versiagas on opposite sides of the state? So
the best was the first time I was going to meet Freddie. So Mondy's like, yeah, come have lunch with me and my brother. And I'm following Monday and I park my car and he goes somewhere else to park. And I'm walking across the street and I see him at the corner. I'm like, and he's not looking at me, not acknowledging me. I'm like, what
are you?
What is going on? And I get up, it's Freddie. Like I was waving at Freddie and had no idea because they look the same.
I was, so when I saw the announcement that Monday had joined your team, I was like looking at pictures online and I actually had to pull up one of each of them and I'm like, they have to be related. There's
Oh,
no
yeah.
possible they couldn't be related.
Yep. Twinsies. So cute. They're just the nicest too, both of them.
I haven't had an opportunity to speak to Monday yet, but Freddie is just so great. He is down at Trinidad and he's taken on a lot because they're short staffed and they've got so much on their plates right now. But he's just so
Right.
gracious and kind and thoughtful every time I talk to him.
Just love
So
him.
yeah.
Monday's the same. You'll love him too. He's just fantastic. I'm so excited to work with him. I'm going to turn my camera off for just a second. Or maybe,
Okay, and it looks like I'm being asked to go to a breakout room, so I'm gonna go over there.
cool.
Oh, I was just talking to myself because I was on mute. Jen, can you put the questions in the chat box so that I can broadcast them out?
Yes. Let me do that quick. Also, I'll put in the chat. Oh, let me stop sharing my screen for a minute because I can never figure this out. I have a link if folks want to brainstorm too. Let me get that. I thought I could share this out with folks so everybody got all the good ideas afterwards, and I forgot to say that.
All right, they're going to be virtually sucked out in about 10 seconds.
Right on. Glad they're chatting though. When they don't come back right away, it means they're actually talking
Yeah.
about something. So that's good.
Yeah, it's good. I'm guessing that by some of the looks on your faces, that wasn't quite long enough to get through the good discussion happening. Well, it looks like everyone has returned.
Awesome. Do a few people want to share what you all talked about, or if there's a really interesting idea you heard or something somebody's doing well? We have at least 5 minutes here to kind of share out some of the greatest stuff, and I'm curious. I can't see everybody, so you might just have to shout out or chat. Trying to see. I can't see chat either, so that's not going to work.
There's nothing in the chat just yet.
Perfect. I know it's the afternoon too. It's tough.
On a Friday at the end of a very long semester.
I guess I'll go real quick if nobody has anything else.
Cool.
I'm Adam Zaleski. I'm psychology faculty at Pueblo Community College. I'm a social psychologist. I study group behavior, so, need to belong is something that's very prevalent in things that I studied in graduate school. And I would just say when it applies to students belonging to the college, I'm a white male. They see lots of examples of white males. So when I show YouTube videos of people doing TED Talks or scientists, researchers, I tend to shy away from white males because they already see plenty of it. So I try to find more women and minorities. And I found I've gotten a very positive response from the students, and they kind of perk up, they get really interested. Because I think it's because, they see enough examples of white males when they can kind of see themselves, as the experts, in the videos, they get a little bit more excited. So.
It's a great one, Adam. Totally hits on that cultural familiarity piece, right? Somebody who looks like me.
So I kind of wanted to piggyback a little bit on what he was saying. I attended a training, and they had this scenario that they read out loud about a business person who was running late to the airport, and the security staff that helped them through, and the pilot that was holding the plane for them. And they just said, like, envision these people, like, what do they look like? And then at the end of it, they showed like who these people were. And even for myself, being minority woman, I was like really taken aback, because I was like, that's not who I envisioned being the pilot, and that's not who, so even as a minority, we all have these underlying these already preconceived thoughts of who people are, and as well. And so I just thought that was really interesting that he was finding other examples of what a pilot. So for instance, the pilot was a Muslim woman. That was not who I envisioned being the pilot, but it was really neat to, just to be confronted with that.
Yeah, for sure. It really gets at the heart of, right? We all still grow up in America. So
Yeah.
just because somebody grows up as a person of color, they're still gonna be taught racism, right? They're gonna still be taught homophobia, sexism, all these things. And yep, absolutely. And we have one more they want to share. All right, I can go on. So here's what I said about Red Rocks in the recommendation section, based on the things that came up in the study of our students. I separated them out and kind of pulled one quote that I thought said it better than I could. So first quote from a student was, "The only way to improve it is to have more color in the color," The student wanted more racial diversity on campus, especially for faculty and staff. Again, students of color over and over said, "I don't need other students of color as my peer group. I need people who know my challenges as my peer group. But for faculty and staff, I need to see people who look like me." Also, we need more visibility on campus. Beyond just the race of people, Students talked about empty halls a lot, right? They talked about coming here and not only not seeing anybody that looked like them, but having a hard time making friends in general, or not feeling like there was a lot of activity on campus. So I think that presence and visibility are also going to be key. Another student said, I haven't seen or thought it was my race per se, right? And this was about less than ideal treatment by faculty and staff at the college. The students of color over and over said they didn't believe their faculty or staff that were working with them were racist, but they still weren't being helpful. So my suggestion here would be more growth opportunities around implicit bias, right? It's clear that we have well-intentioned folks at Red Rocks who want to do the right thing, aren't being malicious in what they do, but aren't recognizing the ways their own bias might be impacting their work with students. So we need to be more aware of that and find more ways to counter that and those ideas that float around in our heads. Lastly, a student said, it's best if there are structures in place. And this was because their experience kind of vacillated so much based on who their teacher was at any given time or what classes they were taking. They felt like there needed to be more structural things there to support them. And one of the big opportunities they saw was co-curricular opportunities where they could not only connect with their peers, but with a staff coach as well, or a faculty coach, whatever that looked like. They commented over and over again that the focus group experiences were one of the best things they'd done since they came here, right? Just having an opportunity to talk to their peers about what they were going through and have somebody there who knew the college well enough to answer questions if they came up. And while not part of the study, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to tell you that right now, you know? So if they had questions about where to go for things, I let them know. They're like, we need this more often. We need more of this kind of stuff where we can talk freely and have the right information, right? Because we can't always rely on our peers to know what we need to know, but we need them there to commiserate, but then we also need the facts. So kind of this combination was what they were looking for. And I'm hoping, you know, as far as research goes, that we'll continue to do this every few years and see how we may be improving or not. But there's lots of, you know, modes to do this out there, as you all know as well. And there's a lot of similarity to HIPS, high impact practices within the CC framework. There's overlap with a lot of culturally relevant teaching. It's all in the same vein, but this is kind of a more specific way of looking at 9 things we can be doing and enacting on campus to shift the environment for students. So that's all I had today. Are there any questions? And before I take that, I'm just going to apologize for my kind of jumping around. I've been out all week and was not fully prepared. So I hope that it was valuable, and I'm happy to answer any questions going forward, or if you have one later too, with more detail. I'd love to do that.
I thought it was great. I couldn't tell you were jumping around. It seemed really well put together. So
Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate
don't let that
you.
imposter syndrome get you. There was one late comment in the box. I'll just go ahead and read it. I joined late, was unable to share in my breakout as we were talking about language barriers. I'm former faculty of health and exercise science at a private 4-year institution that had a large population of international athletes where English was their second language. I taught a research course with a lot of reading, writing, and interpretation components, and it was difficult for those students to communicate in English. So I asked the students to write their papers in their native language. Then I did a Google Translate as I was reading and grading. The students loved it as they were better able to communicate their interpretation of the literature and data as it related to the topic and practical application. That's from Andrew Miller at Pueblo Community College. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really unique strategy, but it sounds like it really worked for your students.
Well, and I want to add, Andrew, that's great too, because one thing that came up for our English language learners that were in the groups was the need for written opportunities in the classroom. Verbal speech was a challenge. And this was also one of the points of disconnect between them and their faculty, right? Because when they go into the classroom and sit down, there's all this small talk happening at the start of the session, and they can't participate in that. They feel like they can't keep up, and it automatically sets the faculty member as kind of buddies with this group, and I'm over here, right? And then when they were trying to talk to peers, they really loved D2L because they could sit and take their time reading through, fully understand the question, and then kind of form their response. So they weren't on the spot in the classroom. So having that mix is super important. Thank you, Andrew. You're awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I do have to jump off to get to the next session, but hope to see you all or some component of you in the next round. Thank you so much, Jen.
Jen, I think you intended to share the slides in the banner.
Sorry,
is that right? But
she can send them to me, and I'll make sure they go out onto the website as soon as everything else is posted.
And then one of my group members shared something in the chat that was also great. It probably is on your slides as well, but just a link to that.
Awesome.
We're saving. Great job.
See ya.